On the 20th of October, 1631, William Slatyer appeared before the High Commission of the Church of England, consisting of eminent bishops and officials, and led by the Archbishop of Canterbury, George Abbot. His appearance is recorded as follows. William Slatyer, that's a misspelling of Slatyer, Doctor in Divinity. Dr. Slatyer submitted himself by his petition to the court, and thereby professed he was heartily sorry for his offense, and tendered his submission to this effect following. Whereas I lately took upon me to translate some of David's Psalms, and added thereunto a scandalous table to the disgrace of religion, and to the encouragement of the contemners thereof, although I have heretofore declared my intentions in so doing, yet I am heartily sorry for my offense herein, and do humbly ask forgiveness for the same of Almighty God, and of the people of God the whole church, promising never to offend again in the like for the time to come. To this he subscribed his name, William Slatyer. Hereupon he was dismissed and freed of his imprisonment, the Archbishop giving him a very sharp reproof for being ever busy about baubles. And the Bishop of London called him back and told him he must there give him admonition of that which from the king he was commanded in all his visitation to make known to all ministers, that they be more careful in their habits, not to go about like rufflers, as if they were ashamed of their ministry. And this is so common a fault, he said, that ministers can hardly be known from other men by their habit. And therefore, Dr. Slatyer, said the bishop, that band is not fit for a minister, nor those ruffles up to your elbows almost. Dr. Slatyer excused himself, saying that he was now in his riding clothes. The bishop replied that if he saw him in the like hereafter, he would look out some canon or other to take hold of him. A marginal note here says he had on a careless ruff and deep cuffs. So who was William Slatyer? That is, not Slatyer as in the report. And what had he done? He was born near Bristol, attended Brasenose College, Oxford, receiving his BA in 1609, MA in 1611, and eventually his DD in 1623. In 1617, he was appointed vicar of Newchurch in Romney, in Kent, with its famously tilted tower. And in 1625, added the parish of Otterden, Kent, between Maidstone and Canterbury. In the meantime, he apparently spent some time as chaplain to Prince Charles and also to Queen Anna, on whose death in 1619 he published a book of polyglot elegies and epitaphs. 2 years later followed his 300-page History of Great Brittany, all the more remarkable for being in tetrameter rhyming couplets throughout, with a Latin blank verse translation on the facing page. Here's a sample of the poetry. To read, what envy shall repine to read, see but the British line, their valiant acts and deeds of old, their bards our poets erst have told, so clear their praise and palms their prize, their brightness blears dim envy's eyes. Sometimes perhaps they were cast down, on whom did fortune never frown. So various are the change of state, so fickle fortune, doubtful fate. The publication that got Slatyer in trouble was Psalms or Songs of Sion turned into the language and set to the tunes of a strange land. It consists of 45 psalm paraphrases in varying verse forms, mostly in English, but including near the end 3 psalms with Greek and Latin versions. The problem, as seen by church authorities, was that Slatyer blithely included a table at the end, naming the popular tunes to which each one of his divine sonnets could be sung. Such a table in itself was not new, since Robert Taylor had included one at the end of his 1615 psalm collection, except that Taylor's tunes were newly composed tablature-accompanied songs like the one shown here. Another precedent was the Court of Virtue, a collection of moral and sacred poems published in 1565 by John Hall, again with his own compositions for the tunes. Some tunes, like the one on the left, resemble metrical psalms, but others, like the Poulter's Measure stanza on the right for the Lamentations of Jeremiah, look and sound suspiciously like popular tunes, and this one doesn't even fit the words very well. Somewhat surprising for a tune composed specifically for the lyric. I am the man whom God in his wrath and fury has with his rod made right expert of every misery. Hall's tunes were apparently newly composed, however, and at least they had no prior profane connections. The difficulty in Slatyer's case, therefore, seems to have been the existing popular tunes themselves and the lyrics that some of them had previously set. As seen in the report of the High Commission given earlier, Slatyer was forced to apologize and repudiate the publication. On the 9th of July, 1631, furthermore, even before his appearance before the High Commission, Slatyer was released on bond from the initial custody. His petition of apology, formally delivered on the 20th of October, was requisitioned, and copies of his book were ordered to be collected and privately burned. This day, Mr. Dr. Slatyer was ordered to be enlarged upon bond, entered to appear here again, primo Michaelis, that is the 29th of September, and he was ordered to bring all his books lately printed with all the Scandalous table annexed, and they were all ordered to be burned in the registrar's house privately, notwithstanding the former order for the burning of them in Paul's churchyard, and the master and wardens of the company of stationers are desired by the court to take care to see all Dr. Slatyer's books, which they have in their custody, to be forthwith sent to the registrar's office of this court by some of their officers who may see them burned accordingly. And the register was required to draw a form of submission to be performed by the said Dr. Slatyer, which is to be perused and allowed by some of the commissioners judges of this court. After that episode, Slatyer's hopes for ecclesiastical preferment were certainly quashed, and he stayed at New Church in Otterden, where he died in 1647. Nevertheless, he published a new collection of psalm translations in 1643 with the lyrics for all of them in Greek, Latin, English, and Hebrew, and giving either Thomas East or Thomas Ravenscroft four-voice musical settings from the repertoire of the whole book of Psalms, like the setting of Psalm 1 shown here. Slatyer was obviously not taking any chances that his choice of music could get him into trouble a second time. In fact, one curious aspect of Slatyer's Scandalous collection is that it was apparently reprinted, though it's unclear if that is really true. A copy surviving in the British Library has 1642 written by hand underneath the printer's name on the title page. This was the best known copy of the collection for a long time, and it does not contain the table of tunes at the end, so 1642 was given as the date of publication for Psalms or Songs of Zion, until copies of the complete edition were discovered in Cambridge University Library and Lincoln Cathedral Library. Lincoln also holds a copy of the so-called 1642 edition, but so far as I've been able to determine, the 1642 edition is the 1631 edition. It's simply missing the final 6 leaves of the earlier print, including Psalm 137 in Greek and Latin, the doubly translated English versions of Psalms 623, 108, 130, and 150, the table of tunes, a postscript, and errata. It seems quite likely that the original edition was never reprinted, something that would be indefensible for a banned and burned book anyway, but rather copies somehow survived and merely had the table, the peccant part, removed. If that also meant removing the last duodecimo signature, containing the duplicate psalms preceding the table, it was no great tragedy. Of special interest with the British Library copy of the 1642 edition, whether or not it was really reprinted, is that in the absence of a table, someone has taken the trouble to annotate some of the psalms with the names of the popular tunes to which they were to be sung. Whether this was done by someone referring to the table or simply remembering what was in it is unclear. It's perhaps more likely that the annotator was remembering because, to cite this one example, they additionally give the title Sad and Ashy Weeds for Psalm 137, whereas the table gives only the title Who Can Blame My Woe, the same tune, but under a different title, along with the King's Tune, the psalm melody. Thus, the annotator appears to be someone who knows the tune repertoire, possibly knows the musical settings already, and is not just transcribing the tune directions from the table. The tune titles in Slatyer's table constitute a veritable catalog of famous tunes around 1630. Queen Dido, also known as Troy Town and Bonnie Nell, Jane Shore, Go From My Window, Walsingham, Dulcina, was also known as Robin Goodfellow, Fortune My Foe, Bonnie Sweet Robin, Fair Angel of England, Complain My Lute, also known as Heartsease, Rogero, Ladies Fall, also known as In Pescad Time, and Daphne. These are all tunes that I encountered repeatedly in my work on play songs in the years leading up to Slatyer's collection. To be fair, 4 of them are tunes from the metrical psalm repertoire, so presumably those would not have offended the church. Of the 33 tune directions for the 45 lyrics, some include duplicates, like the tune Jane Shore, also known by the name Come Live With Me, after the Marlowe poem that it set, which appears 3 times in the table. Other tunes are listed only once, but set multiple psalms. 7 tunes set 2 psalms each, and 3 tunes set 3 different psalms, accounting for fully half the contents. The rest of the tune directions in the table are for individual psalms, though sometimes 2 tunes are listed in a single tune direction. The appearance of multiple tune names in a single tune direction poses an interesting problem. Do the tune titles represent alternative tunes or simply alternative names for the same tune? Sometimes the answer is clear. With the tune direction Queen Dido or Jane Shore, both are recognizable as distinct extant melodies. And with Fair Angel of England or Sweet Robin, given by Slatyer for Psalms 6, 63, and 124, we know that the ballad Fair Angel of England was sung to the tune Bonnie Sweet Robin, so they are the same tune known under both names. But in other cases, one or other of the titles may be unknown. In a case like that, it's unclear whether alternative tunes or alternative titles are being named. An example of that is the tune direction for Psalms 57 and 60, The Marigold That Opens or Fortune. The latter is obviously Fortune My Foe, an extremely popular tune from the 1580s at least, and highly distinctive in setting quatrains of pentameter verse. And there are lots of poems that mention marigolds, but nothing that quotes Marigold That Opens precisely. And the marigold songs that survive are not in pentameters, like the famous tetrameter song Mark How the Bashful Mourn in Vain, attributed to Nicholas Lanier. So there's no possibility that their music could fit Psalms 57 and 60. Thus, there's no tune to represent the marigold that opens, though indeed, like Aim Not Too High, it may simply be another name for Fortune My Foe based on a lost poem calling for that tune. In that case, we can be satisfied that we at least have one tune that Slatyer intended, and maybe the only one. Another issue with the table occurs with the misalignment of some of the tunes and psalms. Here, for example, Psalm 122 is clearly aligned with the tune direction In the Town or Susan. But the versification of the psalm makes clear that it actually belongs with the previous tune, since its very distinctive 22-line stanza versification matches the two psalms set to All in the Garden Green. Over a dozen of Slatyer's tune titles are unknown, and for 6 of his tune directions, no melody can be confidently recognized from even one of the titles given in the table. In such cases, suitable tunes must be found that fit the versification of the poem. This is not as arbitrary as may first appear. By far the vast majority of psalms in the whole book of Psalms, 133 out of 150, are in common meter, or actually double common meter, which is 2 quatrains of 4-3-4-3, 4-3-4-3, typical in an AB-AB or AB-CB quatrain rhyme scheme. This was so characteristic that some period writers even referred to the 4-3-4-3 AB-CB versification as Sternholtz meter. A few poems in the whole book of Psalms are in short meter, what in the secular repertoire is called Poulter's measure, meaning quatrains of 3-3-4-3. And a few in long meter, meaning quatrains of 4-4-4-4, like the famous Old Hundredth or the Psalter's 10 Commandments, shown here. Analysts of the traditional metrical Psalter typically count syllables like 8-6-8-6 rather than 4-3-4-3 poetic feet, but Slatyer is sufficiently oriented towards secular song that his syllable numbers are quite variable. He also uses a much greater variety of versifications and can be accommodated with tunes from the metrical Psalter. That's why Slatyer would have been unable to reissue his Psalms and Songs of Sign with all sacred tunes. Most of his versifications do not exist in the metrical Psalter. But even when his versifications might be found there, as with the 4-4-4-4 Psalms set to Fair Angel of England or Sweet Robin, he does not provide a sacred alternative in his table. On the whole, Slatyer's versifications to lost tunes are distinctive enough that only a small number of popular tunes can be used to set them. In my just-released new musical edition, I provide plausible tunes for each psalm and describe what makes each tune a good candidate, along with information on its survival and early use. In so doing, I believe I am following the direction in Slatyer's postscript, where he talks about fitting the specified tunes to the psalms, expressing also the hope that musicians, at their pleasure, may fit them to more curious and delightful tunes and airs, whether now or anciently devised. It's curious that he says on the title page that his psalms are intended for Christmas carols. Although ubiquitous today, that was a rare expression in Slatyer's time, but certainly suggested convivial entertainment. This passage, from the same year as Slatyer's collection, refers disparagingly to a ballad monger. He has one tune in store that will indifferently serve for any ditty. He is your only man in request for Christmas carols. His works are lasting pasted monuments upon the insides of country alehouses, where they may sojourn without expense of a farthing. And this, from Thomas Middleton, dates from 1604, commenting on the effect of fines, that is taxes, on the morale of country folk. And most musical Madam Nightingale, do but imagine now what a sad Christmas we all kept in the country, without either carols, wassail bowls, dancing of Sellingers round in the moonshine nights about maypoles, shoeing the mare, hoodmen blind, hot cockles, or any of our old Christmas gambles. No, not so much as choosing king and queen on Twelfth Night. Such was the dullness of our pleasures, for that one word, fines, robbed us of all our fine pastimes. Those passages portray Christmas carols as the lowliest and liveliest of entertainments, surprisingly deprecatory for Slatyer's psalms or songs of Zion, considering the sophistication of the lyrics and their musical settings. Perhaps in using the term on the title page, Slatyer was trying to convey a pervading spirit of joy that was not always associated with psalm singing. Also on the title page, Slatyer describes his musical choices as divers of the most noted and common but solemn tunes everywhere in this land familiarly used and known. The last part of that, familiarly used and known, confirms that these were ubiquitous tunes that Slatyer expected every reader to know by name and by melody. The term most noted is perhaps the most ambiguous and could mean best known, most highly regarded, or even most often notated in music. The phrase common but solemn suggests tunes that are widely shared, but that have dignity appropriate for use with sacred lyrics. Obviously, the High Commissioners begged to differ on that issue, but it's interesting that Slatyer seemed to think it was perfectly natural for his psalm translations to be sung to tunes that everybody already knew, perhaps putting into practice the making of a joyful noise unto the Lord, or actually a merry noise, which seems to be Slatyer's preferred term. One question is whether Slatyer wrote these lyrics with the name tunes in mind, or he just noticed that certain tunes would fit the versifications he used. I think it more likely he wrote the lyrics with the tunes and their attendant versifications in mind. Complicated versifications, such as those used to set tunes like Dulcina, Complain Minute, In Sad and Ashy Weeds, shown here, and What If a Day, are so far from the thumping monotony of the metrical psalm repertoire that it seems impossible they appeared by accident, only to have Slatyer notice afterwards that they fit certain tunes. As Slatyer's poetry editor Gordon Jackson noted, Slatyer did not succeed in his hope to make psalmody as pleasing a practice to commoners of England as carol singing. His verses may have included some occasional poetic infelicities, though the same might be said of Thomas Sternhold, but there are also some wonderful lyric moments. Slatyer's failure to reach his intended audience was almost certainly due more to the suppression of his book at its inception than to the shortcomings of his muse. Metrical psalm historian Beth Quitzland notes the almost dizzying conceptual distance from the early Edwardian scriptural paraphrasts to Slatyer's psalms set to popular tunes, and this is true from both a poetic and musical standpoint. But at the same time, the earliest metrical psalmists, whether German, French, Dutch, or English, used popular tunes of their own day as a way of claiming them for the Reformed religion. Many of these tunes became so identified with psalms that their origins were forgotten, and by 1631, the use of a new generation of popular tunes was seen as an affront to the tradition and to religion itself. From what little evidence we have, Slatyer appears to be a fascinating character. His tombstone survives in Otterden Church, although his medieval church building was replaced in the 18th century. He presumably wrote the inscription himself, and we learn some interesting things about what he thought was important. Besides being chaplain to the most serene Prince Charles, he was provost of King James's Theological College at Chelsea, which had a reputation for polemics and which he had joined as a fellow by at least 1629. He became provost in 1645 and held the post until his death on the 14th of February, 1647. His work there presumably led him to style himself a proven champion of the church and conqueror of schismatics. He also claimed to be a celebrated teacher of 10 languages, an assertion he seemed to flaunt with neologisms: philoretophil, philolethophil, philantophil, lover of excellence, lover of truth, lover of the prince, apparently proclaiming his royalist sympathies to the end, just days after his former patron, King Charles, was handed over to Parliament for imprisonment, that surrender taking place on a January day in Newcastle. At his appearance before the High Commission in 1631, Slatyer's flamboyant, unclerical attire offended the Bishop of London and eventual Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, who in modern times has been described as the greatest calamity ever visited upon the English church. Slatyer made a nonchalant excuse about his riding clothes, and my guess is that Laud's objection did not much matter to him. His decision to name so many popular tunes, along with composed tunes by Campion and Coprario, to set his newly written psalm translations seems a wholly innocent and honest thing to do, not a deliberate attempt to bring scandal or encourage the enemies of religion, as the High Commission saw it, Why else would he do it? The fact that a highly educated, literate, even religious person did this shows how deeply embedded the culture of popular tunes was around this time. And the fact that he defiantly ended his tombstone inscription, Extat operibus, he lives in his works, suggests that he continued to believe he did nothing wrong. To my mind, Slatyer's 1631 collection also vindicates what I've been saying about the use of popular tunes, and sometimes composed tunes, to set play song lyrics around the same time, in addition to demonstrating that authors could conceive of more than one possible tune for a single lyric. As to whether Slatyer's choice was deliberate in beginning his tune list with an H-pipe or hornpipe, thereby exemplifying Shakespeare's Winter's Tale Puritan singing songs to hornpipes, remains an open question. As he glances sidelong at us mysteriously from his only known portrait, William Slatyer is letting his divine sonnets speak, or rather sing, for themselves, which at this point is probably what we should do too. Of the 84 settings in my new edition, including multiple and conjectural tunes for some of the 45 psalm lyrics, it's difficult to choose just one to share here, but this one, with its cute quadruple rhyme, tabernacle, habitacle, borrowed from Théodore de Bèze's French Psalm 76, in fact, and it's switched to a lilting triple meter halfway through with hemiolas, no less, reveals Slatyer's sensitivity to the marriage of tune and text, and his delight in making, as he might say, a merry noise unto the Lord. For a taste of his forbidden and forgotten art, please sing this stanza after me. I'll sing it once first, and then please join in on the repeat. Mic's off, of course, except for the conference room in Newcastle. Lord, within thy tabernacle, whom wilt thou receive to dwell? Or within the habitacle of thy Zion's sacred cell? Thy royal tents, high battlements, who shall ascend where comes no ill? With thee to abide, to reside, and rest upon thy holy hill. Okay, Catherine, it's up to you.
You want all our mics on or just this one at the front here?
I want everybody in the room to sing it.
Yep. Okay.
It's up to you whether you press it like or not.
Okay. Is that the first note? Are we going? Happy with that? Okay, let's start. Ready? And Lord, within thy tabernacle, oh, within.
What's happening? Well, the audio cut out so much that I couldn't tell if you actually got through it, but I think you did. So
maybe
thank
the mic,
you.
maybe multiple mics set it up.